Ah, now it's gone.
Now we're right. It's working. Ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday I took my children out for an expedition to reward them for working so hard at school this year, and we went to visit the country's longest show cave in North Yorkshire. So that was quite fun. We wandered through the cave and admired the stalactites and stalagmites, and on the way home we passed the organic farm from which we order our fruit and vegetables every week, because we have one of these veg box delivery schemes. So once a week the driver turns up with a big box of vegetables and a big box of fruit and lots of other groceries, and it all comes from this farm in Lancashire called Growing with Grace. We recently became shareholders because I think it's important to know where your food comes from and to support the growers of that food, but I thought it would be even better to go and visit them. So we went along and saw the 3 enormous glass houses in which they grow all manner of salad vegetables, beet and chard and spinach, and lots of nasturtiums. They put the flowers in the bags of salad leaves that they deliver to us. So that was lovely. And that led me to wonder about the future of British farming post-Brexit, which is what I want to talk about today. Because I think the least that can be said about Brexit is that it has brought a great deal of uncertainty. Uncertainty about the status of EU migrants after Brexit. That's something that will affect some of the people in this room, perhaps even. Uncertainty about the future of the city of London as the financial centre of Europe. Uncertainty in many sectors, and above all, uncertainty about the future of British farming, which is all the more ironic because people living in the countryside voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU, which leads me to question whether they were shooting themselves in the foot. And indeed, it appears from recent opinion polls that these people living in the countryside are already regretting that vote, or are already worrying about what the implications of Brexit will be for them and for their livelihoods. Too little, too late is all I can say to those people. Now, I suppose I could digress for a moment and say farming in the UK represents just 0.7% of GDP, and it employs only 1% of the workforce. So you could argue that it's very much less critical than other sectors. But at the same time, food is always somehow different from other sectors because it's the basis of everything, being able to feed yourself, self-sufficiency, the risk that in times of conflict you could be cut off. I mean, some of these issues were actually some of the principles underlying the CAP, the idea of security of supply. So food is different from other sectors. And I'd like to go through briefly for you now the 4 main areas of uncertainty for British farming post-Brexit. The first of these is the post-Brexit trading relationship with the EU. What will that relationship look like? The reason this is important is because the UK relies very heavily on exports to the EU. And let me give you just one example. 95% of UK sheep are exported to the EU. But if mutual customs duties are imposed after Brexit, UK production could be subject to tariffs of 30%. You can imagine the impact that that would have. The second area of uncertainty is around subsidies. You probably know that British farming is very heavily subsidised. subsidies account for 55% of farmers' income. It's a huge proportion. Now, at the moment, the bulk of all of that is subsidies from the CAP, it's European subsidies, which amount to £3.5 billion per year. And all of this is in doubt now with Brexit. Now, the government has pledged to maintain the level of spending, the level of subsidies, until 2020. But there's a big question mark over what would happen to farming subsidies after that. And some estimates suggest that without subsidies, 90% of farms would collapse and land prices would crash. Many farms would simply not be viable without the subsidies. Third area of uncertainty, it's the question of migrant workers. This is a sector that relies very heavily on seasonal migrant labour from the continent, from Eastern Europe, Romanian workers, from all over the place. And already this flow of migrant workers is drying up. Why? Partly because of the image that has been projected to the world at large with the result of the referendum vote, and that image is Britain doesn't want foreigners, Britain is racist, Britain is xenophobic, we don't want you here. And the other reason is the weak pound, which makes working in the UK at the moment less attractive. So already that flow is drying up. Anecdotally, there is evidence from some farmers that they're letting some of their crops rot in the field because they haven't got the pickers for their strawberries or their asparagus, and that's only going to get worse next year. Now, the farmers want the government to implement a scheme that would allow non-EU workers to work in Britain, for example, Ukrainians, but there hasn't been a green light for that as yet. And the final area of uncertainty, as I see I've already spoken for 7 minutes, is that the UK farmers could be at risk from new trade deals with non-EU states post-Brexit. And the problem here is that some of these non-EU states have lower environmental standards, lower food safety standards, lower animal welfare standards, and that could put British farmers at a competitive disadvantage because the farmers from the non-EU states can produce more cheaply because they don't have to comply with such stringent standards. So those are 4 big areas of uncertainty. To conclude, despite all this doom and gloom, many people are seeing Brexit as a potential opportunity for farming in Britain, an opportunity to reform and make the sector more environmentally friendly. And Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens are adamant that agriculture could be reformed in such a way as to incentivise farmers to look after the countryside, the hedgerows, the waterways, etc. And secondly, Brexit could also be an opportunity to reform the system of subsidies, which has come under a lot of fire for supporting large landowners. Everyone's always going on about this very rich landowner who owns a stud farm and who receives £400,000 in subsidies every year, even though he's a billionaire. So it's a system that's based on the amount of land you have at the moment. And therefore rich landowners receive more money than small farmers, which seems a very skewed system. So the opportunity is there to reform, but time will tell whether that reform goes in the right direction. Thank you.